An estimated 14% of the Philippine population belongs to the indigenous peoples.
Welcome to Dialogues on Democracy. I'm Joseph Marcus, Communications Officer at IFES. Indigenous communities face unique barriers as they try to access political and electoral processes. In this episode, Philippine Election Commissioner Luie Guia talks about the importance of including these marginalized populations. Hi, Commissioner Guia, and welcome. Can you describe the marginalization that indigenous communities in the Philippines face? And why is it important that these citizens have representation?
Most of our indigenous peoples are in the mountains. They are the ones that are usually subject of harassment. They're the ones that usually are prevented from exercising their right because of access issues, educational issues. They don't get heard. This is a big problem here in the Philippines, unfettered development plans that does not take into account the cultural heritage of our indigenous people, which needs to be preserved.
Describe some of the unique barriers indigenous populations have when attempting to access the electoral process.
Our law says that all those who are qualified should go to the office of the election officer and apply for registration. And that is very difficult for people who would live in the mountains, who would live far away from the town centers. They are also not included in the civil registry system that will entitle them to at least identification document.
You've brought up indigenous communities' remote locations and lack of identification. What steps are being taken so these communities can exercise their democratic rights?
What the Commission on Election did was to create temporary offices in the places where the indigenous peoples are. We changed the rules a little, like, allowing an elder to attest as to the identity of someone registering as a voter, maybe 2 or 3 elders, and that would be enough for us. And one strategy that also was devised by the Election Commission was to initiate a project with the Civil Registry Office, where we both go to the mountains and then have a common simultaneous registration. And, we reach out to people who are traditionally not included in this very important government listing for census purposes. People were creative enough to think of these schemes. We have to sensitize our people on how they should deal with people from these sectors. And that would mean maybe having appropriate languages, more aware of the cultural issues. They should be more sensitized in the rights of people from the vulnerable sector. An inclusive election is something that has to be made an intrinsic part of election administration.
Once they are registered, then what? Will they be able to vote?
We are also planning to establish voting centers near where they are so that they can also have better access to the facilities of voting. If we do not do that, we would be excluding them from the right to vote. The idea here is to empower the IP population so that they can, participate in mainstream politics, and they can also get their agenda that will benefit their community, their conditions, and that can uplift their situation in the mainstream policymaking process.
Tell me about the assistance IFES has provided.
IFES initiated, together with some civil society groups, the linking of the Commission on Human Rights and the Commission on Elections in coming up with a project that would ensure a more inclusive election. And this initiative brought about a new concept in election management, at least here in the Philippines, and we call it the human rights-based approach to election. We just concluded training a batch of our election officials yesterday, and they've realized that it's actually part of the job. It defines a standard on how I can assess my performance as an election worker. I have to make sure that those more people who are qualified to vote, including indigenous peoples and those who are traditionally excluded, are given their rights.
How can you measure the impact of this approach? And how will it affect marginalized populations?
We revised our forms, and now we're keeping track of data as to how many they are and where they are. So the compliance, perhaps, of our people in this requirement is something that, can be considered a measure, and it will help us, plan our policies better. More people who are qualified to vote, including indigenous peoples and those who are traditionally excluded, are given their rights. Unless I do that, no matter how accurate the election results are, if we have excluded certain sectors of the society, that we have not done our job well.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share and like. We also welcome your comments on our YouTube channel. For more information about IFES's work in the Philippines and with underrepresented populations, please visit www.ifes.org.